My name is Kara Brown. I am an urban fantasy author, and I'm coming at you with one of the first Woodstock videos involving how to start a story. So, before I dive into the topic, I do want to talk about Wordstock a little bit. Wordstock is facilitated by a story detective, also known as Robert Jones, and he wanted to do something involving basically a bunch of us here on Authortube coming together and basically discussing a topic. These are kind of like webinars where we talk about whatever the given topic is, and we're doing it from a variety of perspectives. He definitely wants to bring people from different experiences and different avenues in order to talk about whatever it is that we are going to talk about. And the really nice thing is that we have actually a really good selection this first time around. I was super excited to see all these names that you see here. It's going to rotate as well. So you're not always going to see the same people because, again, Robert wants to break down the walls that have kind of accidentally happened within our AuthorTube community in order to bring more people together, and I think that this is going to be a great thing. So anyway, enough about me praising Robert and his thing. Let's go ahead and talk about how to start a novel. So before I do that, I want to tell you guys a story. I'm very prone to storytelling, as you can tell, because I am a storyteller. Um, so a couple years ago, I was over at my writing group slash critique group, and what we do there is people bring in their material, and we kind of look over it together, and we give our feedback. Sometimes we talk about stories, sometimes we talk about format, sometimes we talk about story plots. It kind of depends on what is brought in and the level of the writer and things like that. Now, one person came in and she brought in these 6 pages because that's how we do it. We do it in an increment of 6 pages. And in the 6 pages, I had literally no idea what was going on. It was a bunch of rambling from the character's perspective. I didn't know who this character was. I didn't know what was happening, and I was just completely lost. And when I told her like, "Hey, I'm feeling really lost here. I don't know who I am or what's going on. Like, I really need the scene to be set." She basically told me that it was a thriller written from the point of view of somebody who was like psychotic, and they were always going to ramble and all this other stuff. And my thought was, and I told her honestly, it's like, this seems more like a thought exercise that you want to explore, because I can tell you that a lot of people with the way that you've written this is not going to be engaged. And she told me I was wrong, and I was decided at that point like, maybe I shouldn't engage in this conversation anymore. um, and later, about 6 months later, I went to a writing seminar because I like to go to these and I like to hear what other people have to say and see if I can take that information and share it back. And I noticed that one of the seminars that was happening was done by a writing coach, and she was actually going to talk about the 300 words of the story. And I was completely blown away by what she was talking about. Like, I took so many notes. Like, she had a handout, I wrote all over it, I asked her questions afterwards, and I walked out of there feeling like I really took something away from the experience. So that's actually what I'm going to share with you. Now, before I dive into what that is, I do want to do a quick follow up on that, because um, the follow up is that after I got done talking to her, I did go and confirm some of the stuff that she was saying with an indie publisher. They have been publishing for 5 years, and I asked, hey, and when it comes to the start of your stories, is this kind of stuff that you're looking for? And they said yes. I talked to a writing coach. She has 10 years experience with working with traditional and self-published authors, and she said, yeah, that's really important stuff to actually, make sure that you're establishing in the start of your story. And then I also went and double checked with two of my editor friends. One does urban fantasy, another one focuses primarily on romance, and they also said, yeah, those are things that definitely need to be done. So I'm basically telling you that I went and talked to all these credible people to tell you that the thing I want to talk to you about is credible. So anyway, moving on. Let's talk about the thing. The thing I want to talk to you about is the first 300 words of your story. This is also setting the scene and establishing characters and everything else. But the thing is that with your novel, you have to establish this stuff within the first 300 words of your manuscript, or a lot of places are going to reject it. Now, what I have right here are a list of do's and don'ts, and I am going to go ahead and talk about those things with you. The first thing that you do need to do is you do need to establish the time frame of when your story is happening. You don't have to put like, don't make it like Star Trek where it's like star date, blah, 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 unless that's part of the narrative. By giving people like an idea about when and where these things are happening, that's really important. Defining the location, that's also important. People like to know where they are, and what kind of place it is. Now, you don't have to like, don't have to go into like things like Brooklyn was a very bad place and blah 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 blah. It's kind of trying to define it in a way that's gradual and eases your reader into the thing. And talking about easing your reader into the thing, you also got to introduce your main character. Like I told you before, with the one person that brought their 6 pages in, I had no idea who or where I was or anything like that. I was just completely, absolutely lost. And then the other thing that I took away from the seminar about the 300 words is that you have to find some way to work in your genre. And this was a little mind-blowing for me because I never really thought about it. And then once she mentioned it, that's when I started to pick up on it a lot. And there like there was one book that I read last year, and it said that it was a paranormal romance, but I had gotten into like chapter 3 and there was no sign of paranormal. It just seemed like more like a romantic comedy at that point. So when you write in whatever genre that you're going to write in, it's really important that you somehow sprinkle in the element of what makes your genre what it is. Now, how you do that really kind of depends on you. And I do have some examples that I've written that I'm going to share with you so that way you kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about. Now, the don'ts. Don't go off on internal monologue tangents. This kind of goes back to the 6-page lady, and this was actually touched on in the seminar as well, that sometimes authors, when they're writing for the first time and they're writing from the character's POV for the first time, they go off on some kind of inner monologue tangent, and what they're really doing is they're actually exploring the character's personality, but they don't realize that that's where the story starts. So it's just stuff like that. Don't start with a dream. That was hammered in so hard from basically every person that I talked to. Don't have your character have a dream and wake up from the dream, or don't have them wake up from the dream with some vague recollection. Like, everybody's tired of the dream thing. Just try to avoid it. Don't start your first chapter with any kind of info dump or background story. And I unfortunately see this a lot with self-published works, where the author is scared that the reader is not going to understand their world very well, and so one of the things that they do is they'll have some action and then break it up with a bunch of info dumping, where they either talk about their 5-year-long friendship with their friend, or they talk about how like society works. And there's a lot of easier ways to actually work that into your narrative without having to stop what's happening. And if you guys want a video on that, please let me know. I'd be happy to talk about that with you. Don't lecture your reader. This was actually brought up by the indie publisher that I was talking to, because they said that there's a lot of works that they read where the author for some reason is using their character to like lecture the reader in the beginning of the story, and that kind of blew my brain a little bit, but they mentioned that they'd seen it enough to actually tell me about it. So and however you decide to start your story, don't at any point within those first, I want to say first 3 chapters, because you got to earn your reader's trust, but don't lecture your reader about something that might be going on at the time. Just try to avoid that. And then fourth wall break, that unless it's part of the continuity of the story, that's seen as an author intrusion. So try to avoid things like you when you're talking to your, or rather not when you're talking to your reader, unless you're writing like a nonfiction book where you're actually doing some kind of some self-help thing. There's really no need to break fourth wall with your fiction work unless you're writing a character like Deadpool, and as I said, that's a constant thing that's happening within it. But there are some authors that when they are writing, they'll sit there and write something. It's like, and you would think that blah 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 blah. Don't do that. Just be aware. Just don't do it. So I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't give you some examples. So these examples that I'm going to present to you are actually my examples. These are works that I've written, and I'm just going to go ahead and share that with you. Now, just disclaimer, I am not a great reader, so if I stumble upon this a little bit, many apologies. I'm working on it, small steps. But we're going to go ahead and start with the first one, which is my work in progress called The Persephone. And I'll go ahead and read it, and then I'll talk about these points that I have in detail. A soft beeping filled the air as the lights in the room came on. With a groan, Corey pushed herself up from the thin mattress and rubbed her face. "Good morning, Corey," a female mechanical voice said overhead. "It is presently 600 hours, and the date is June 16th at 43:21. Would you like to go over your morning gratitude?" "No," Corey croaked. She swung her legs over the side of her cot and continued to rub the sleep from her eyes. "Let's go over the agenda." Very well. The screen, taking out the majority of one wall, lit up with the image of a dark-skinned woman wearing glasses flipping through the pages of a book. She stopped on one page and pressed her finger to it. "Your schedule has changed to accommodate for medical checkup at 700 hours. Corey looked up from her hands with a frown. "Medical check? I didn't schedule a check. Sully, why was this added?" The image of the woman flickered. "Hold, please." Moments later, her face was replaced with a message from Corey's inbox from the head of research and development. "Team, the inspection from the benefactor has been moved up to tomorrow. I know this is putting a lot of pressure on you, but looking over things, I'm confident that we are ready as we are going to be. Per his request, the entire facility has been scheduled for medical check, and the medical droids have been burning their engines out trying to clean everything. I've scheduled my department to be checked first, so do not be late under any circumstances. Inspection starts at 100 hours. Be ready. Corey flopped onto her bed with a groan. Why is he doing this? The screen flickered back to the woman looking up from their book. I do not understand your inquiry. Please restate. Okay, so from the Persephone, we are obviously working with third person limited, because we're doing everything from Corey's because we are doing everything from Corey's perspective, and we're not adding in any extra information. By using the morning routine, I am establishing the time and location along with the genre. You've got Corey waking up from where she is, and she's talking to the AI in her room who's going over her schedule. The AI is also introducing the date, but we don't really quite know the location at this point, but that's pretty much coming very soon. But we do know that this is the future. We are at some kind of facility, and there is something involving research and development going on. There's also a little bit of the character interaction being seen as the main character does speak back and forth with the AI. So that's one way that you can do it. So the next thing I'm going to read is actually from my other book, Queen of Swords in Silence, and this is the one that hasn't been edited fully, and the reason I'm doing that is because there's one thing obviously in bold that I want to point out, but we'll get there. So let me pull that up real quick. Chapter 1, Abandonment Center. When a home has a sign on the front door that says, if you have a fever, are vomiting, or feel nauseated, do not enter, most call them a hospice group home. I call them abandonment centers. My watch read just past midnight, and the streets behind my stolen car were deserted. Even in the middle of winter, the place was warmer than I cared for, but I wasn't a fan of desert biomes. Anything over 30 Celsius was unreasonable to me, which Arizona often was. My hand rapped on the door, and I waited until it creaked partway open. A middle-aged Hispanic woman in blue scrubs narrowed her eyes at me through the crack. You called for a pickup, I said, holding up the bamboo plant I purchased from the 24-hour store. It wasn't much as secret signs go, but it worked. Her eyes widened, and the sour aroma of fear filled my nose. Must be her first time, I thought. When she didn't open the door further, I smiled and did my best to be unintimidating. Granted, being a 6 foot tall, something pale, Amazon looking woman looming outside of the door in the middle of the night never helped, so I nudged the door with my foot. She got the hint and stepped back to allow me in. The first door on the left, she said with a gesture towards the hallway. So that's obviously first person. And it's semi-scene setting because she's talking about the location and how it's warmer than she likes, and she's also describing how it's the middle of the night by looking at her watch and then talking about how the streets behind her are deserted. The other kind of tidbit that I put in there is that she refers to temperature as Celsius and not Fahrenheit because she is not American. And a lot of people picked up on that. Some folks didn't. And I'm scene setting a little bit in that by having her pick up on the scent of fear because obviously normal people are not going to pick up on somebody else's fear. So that's a little bit of the genre setting there. Now, the one thing I didn't do, which I did have to adjust for later, is that I had to put in this character's name. I did indicate kind of what she looked like and kind of how she appeared, but I did not say her name. So all we know is that she's this big ass woman standing outside of some house that's a hospice group home in the middle of the night. So that's pretty much where I kind of did wrong, and I did have to correct that later. And I was really stubborn about that too, because I was like, I don't want to say anybody's name until like blah 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 blah. But you know, when you have 3 or more people say you need to change that, you have to change it. So I gave you those examples and I kind of gave you guys some information, and what I would like to do right now is that when it comes to crafting your 300 pages, I want to give you questions to ask yourself, because sometimes knowing what direction to move in is probably going to help you out a little bit more. Now on the screen right here I have 4 questions that I think are going to be really beneficial to having you make those 300 words the best that they can be and give you the best shot at getting accepted. So I've got the obvious stuff from like how can I show the setting, how can I introduce the characters, what can I do to sprinkle the theme of my genre into my story. And this last one, which I didn't quite kind of dive into too much, but I feel like at this point it's warrant talking about, is like where is the best place in your story to actually start your story. And the reason I say that is because a lot of times when people start writing their novel, they're not starting it from where it actually needs to start in the book. They're kind of starting it from where they as the author need to start it to give them all that information that they need. So keep that in mind when you're doing your edit. It's like, where is the best place for me to actually start the story, and kind of cut out what you as the author needed to put in there. But that is the end of my presentation when it comes to having to start your story with the first 300 words and things that you need to do. I am going to include a link to the Story Detectives page because he is going to have a playlist crafted where he puts all these videos together. And you should probably give him a follow and a like and all this other stuff. He's a really nice guy and he does a lot for the community and definitely needs a bit more love than I feel like he's getting right now. And you should probably like follow him on Instagram too and like Twitter and like all that other stuff because he's super cool to follow. But that's going to be pretty much me. Down below, I got some links to some stuff that you can purchase that I have written. I've got places where you can contact me if you're interested in connecting with me. But that's going to be the end of this presentation for Wordstock, and I hope that you all have a wonderful day.